Morning, everyone. My name's David Arnold. I'm one of the senior trainers here at Workamajig. Today's topic is about reporting. Okay. I know you guys have a lot of questions regarding that. A little housekeeping. If you want to ask questions, go ahead and put those into the Q&A section. I'll get to those. The recording of this will be available probably later this week on our YouTube channel. But you'll also usually get an email regarding the recording is available. Okay. If you have any questions that arise from this and you would like further training on, go ahead and send an email to support@workamajig.com, and we'd be happy to help you with any of your reporting needs. Okay. So let's kind of jump into it. Okay, reports. How do I get data out of Workamajig? So obviously this is a SQL database, okay? So we can always, whatever goes in, we can usually get it out. Now we have some standard kind of views or reports that are in the system, and we kind of separated these out according to what your role is. So if you go into, for example, salesperson in today's sales, we figure that you're probably working with your contacts, companies, conversations, right? So whatever that reporting is, we do have some standard items in here. And again, a standard view for its part will obviously consist of certain columns, right, that you have. And again, there's a huge list of columns that would be available, but we do kind of silo it out in regards to what you're looking for. So again, this is about companies. So a lot of those company-related fields are going to be in here, okay? Again, whatever field you want to pull in, and we'll get to a little bit of the simpleness of, how do I group things and how do I put into columns? And that's what a lot of this is how I can further manipulate the data that is available. I think that makes sense as far as, again, our standard ones. And like I said, we silo it out. If I'm in sales, I tend to get this type of information. If I'm in billing, of course, my views are probably going to be more billing related. And so that's why I get, receipts, deposits, client invoices, and actually client list, which is slightly different than the company list, right? And then purchasing, again, would get, kind of things that are specified for them. Okay. Does that make sense? Again, we're hoping that that's what's driven. Again, we provide you the information that's kind of pertinent to you. Sorry that you may have to jump between today's, but we also allow you to over in the top right corner under global search, where you can see all of those different views from the today pages are lined out here. And if there's a certain one that you want, I always go and look at this one. For example, I always look at purchase orders. I can go ahead and click on this one and say, I always want to look at open purchase orders, and I can favorite that, and that will now bubble it up to the top. So it's always there at the the very first few that I have. Okay. All right. Now, the difference between a view versus a report. So we get to our reports from Everyone Report Center. And I would suggest in the beginning that you actually use the views. Why do I suggest the views? Those will have kind of hot links, right? So if I'm looking at client invoices, the line or the result will allow me to click and see that actual transaction, for example. Okay. Whereas the report functionality is more of that read-only information, although we do provide, like if you put in a project number, that project number would be a hot link. But otherwise, the reports are more for a read-only, okay? Now, even in the reports, we have some standard ones that come in that you should have access to. And we have it separated by what is it that you need to see. So we have, for example, if you're in AP, again, those are the purchasing. So we're going to have obviously the 1099, AP aging, those types of things. Again, things that have to do with purchasing. Same thing with the AR side, right? Things that have to do with billing. We're going to provide those as standards. Okay. Project financials, that type of thing, traffic type reports. Again, does that make sense that we kind of siloed out? So again, what is it that you need to see? Again, same thing as we saw on the views. If I kind of mouse over and I go ahead and click onto that, onto the star, that has now been favorited. And so now I'll see this favorite sitting here, and there we go. That makes sense? And if I don't want it to be a favorite anymore, I can go ahead and just click on the gold star and it'll be removed from that particular list. Okay. All right. So that's kind of the basic navigation. I'm going to go ahead and step back into the views again. I'm going to go ahead and use one that I have up here and to kind of walk through it. Let's see here. Sorry, views. And I'll just go ahead and use this one here. Okay. Now, the way I create a view, right, or edit a view is whatever I have, from that view or even the report, doesn't matter what it is, right? When I come into it, I'm going to see a modify, and this is controlled by security rights. Can I actually do this? So again, you don't have maybe a copywriter blank out your reports, right? So it's a right to modify, all right? So I click on modify, and that's going to give me, again, that access to edit that particular one. In order to kind of, I want to leave this one alone and I want to create a new one. We have a little bit of a mantra going, and that would be I can come to more. I say copy this view, say yes, and then, sorry, I've been in my system for a long time, couple of days, and so it'll pop out this screen. It's great that it did. I'm going to tell you, close these. Close this one. You saw it slid out. It should still be this one that I want to deal with. This is so I'm not accidentally saving the wrong one. Okay. So then I apply the change. Once I've got that, you can see it says copy of the report name. I apply the changes and I memorize. And so now I know I'm using this particular copy. And so now I can edit it as I need. Okay. So that's the mantra again. Copy this view. If something else slides out, close those, don't edit that one. Use the one and it'll say copy of, apply changes, and then memorize it, and then go ahead and go back and do the modify again. And now I know that I'm editing that copy and not my original. Okay. And this will be true for reports as well. They both work the same way. Okay. Once I do have a copy, I'll notice that I'll go to settings then, and this is where I can rename it and change who has access to it. So we always create things as private. So I'll go ahead and uncheck private, and then I can do visible to either security group or I can select people. Okay, kind of the basic thing. So again, who do I want to have access to this? I give them that. If they're not in these security groups, then they can't see this. Okay, I know this is going to sound weird. That includes the owner, okay? Even with your admins. Again, if you're not in one of these security groups, this report would disappear for you because this is the way we kind of drive it. But again, if you do people, you can always pick out the people that you want to have access to this. Good point of reference. In order to run a report, this is and views, for the most part, it's for full paid seats. So clients can have some access to things and can run certain views, but for the most part, they do not have access to do anything, and they definitely don't have access to edit. Okay. All right. So I think that's the basics. Any questions on kind of that basic, how do I do it? You're probably saying, you already spent 10 minutes on this, get away from it. Okay. Not seeing any questions, so I'll go on to the next one. What you guys came here for, and that was really how do we better manipulate the data? So like I said, we want to mostly go use the views to begin with, and that is just because when I run this, it's going to give me the results, and really I can come in and I can click into it and it gives me that particular transaction. Okay. And if you guys have questions, you can just type the questions. Okay. And I'll see them and answer them or save them for a time when I stop. Okay. Okay. So again, this is why we tend to say drive you to these. Gotcha. Okay. And talking about exporting, again, I'll get to that one a little bit later, but usually what it reports, it sends it out as is actually it whatever the name of your report is, that's what it sends out as the file name. Okay. And I'll show that. Okay. But let me get to more how I'm setting up, then I'll talk about some other features in that, and that includes the export for use by others. Okay. All right. So again, that's the reason I want to kind of use the views, is just so I have, that quick link to the actual data itself. Like I said, reports do not have that functionality per se. It's really more of a read only and kind of doing being able to view the data. Okay. So what are some of the things that we can use to manipulate this? So this one happens to be from my client billing, right? So it's looking at client invoices, as you saw. So when I modify this, one of the things I want to talk about is what is it that we can actually do? So for the most part, you understand that we can obviously insert a row and we can grab something, right? And it will, it'll show the results that are coming from that record when I apply it and run that report. Again, that's fairly basic. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at is, okay, that's great, but oftentimes I need to maybe put things together, okay? Or I want to do a particular month or something like that. How do I go about doing that? So concatenating things, basically restricting data to a particular item, that type of thing. So one of the ones that we use for concatenation, right? And that's a fairly easy one to do. So we're going to work with calculated columns, okay? So the idea of a calculated column is really just saying, I'm going to put in a little bit of code and that's what it's going to show. So when we concatenate, that's really combining two different fields together, as you know, okay? Now, some fields work well together, others do not. I'll just give you that heads up. Okay. But for the most part, the thing that I often see is, for example, I want the client name, perhaps. And then let's say, for example, I want the project name. So again, here I go. I put project name, or where to go? Project name here. So I'm going to have a field that has the client name and the project name. Now, it looks like I could just say plus, but actually when we're concatenating things, we actually need to come in and we say a plus, okay, sorry, plus, and then we put a hash, and then whatever is between that hash, this next character is what will be the separator. So if I used a colon, a dash, right, a pipe, right, whatever it is that I want to separate those out, and then I can actually add a space in there and then another hash. So now I'm going to have basically client name, pipe, space, and then the next thing. And that would be followed by a plus. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to name this. Okay. What is the data type? Since these are both text fields, right? I'm going to say text. And so I can go ahead and save that. And there is the formula right here. So again, client name plus hash, and then whatever you have in between there, another hash plus and project name. So now when I apply this and run it, okay, sorry, I'm going to have to scroll over to the right here. I have to, oh, did I not get that? I told you. When I do these things, sometimes they work and sometimes not. I'll take out the pipe and actually use a dash in here. Client name, project name, text. Okay. Okay. Search. And of course, I got a bad one. Okay. I did a bad example. There we go. Don't I hate when I do that? All right. Let me show you a different one. Actually, that's what I said. Sometimes the concatenation doesn't work. It does take a little bit of sometimes I don't want to say hunt and peck a little bit. I do have one for time detail here, and I know I concatenated this one. Okay. So for example, I had this concatenation here. You're going, holy cow, this is a lot of stuff to do. I'll give you guys a heads up. I'm going to go ahead and if you send me a note to support at Workamajig and say, hey, can I get some of these samples? I will happily answer that and provide you with these files that I'm creating and these reports and send those to you. Okay. Right. I'm sorry, my concatenation didn't work, but just to show you that, again, little trial and error. I hate to do that on the fly, but there we go. And so here we go. I actually concatenated the week along with dates. Okay. So that's, again, kind of that feature that we can do. All right. Sorry, that one I showed you didn't quite work out. The next one I'm going to look at is, again, what are some of the other fields that I can do? So the next thing we kind of look at is case when. This is a fairly common one that we can use to kind of pull in specific data. Okay. So I used one up here in my grouping. So this is, again, that billing report. And I said, case when field name equals the result. Okay. Then do something. Otherwise, do something else and then end it. So this is the code that's pretty standard. It's basically case when something, then give me a result. Otherwise, if it doesn't equal that or not equal to that or whatever I put in this little calculation, then give me a different result. So what I did in this case was I said, well, if it's marked as an advance bill, and so if you know that field, advanced billing invoice, that says yes or no. So I just said, when the advanced billing equals yes, then label that deposit. Otherwise, call it revenue. So what did that get me? So now when I search here and I have the client first, I get this separation between deposit invoices and revenue invoices. So that's a pretty simple case when statement to kind of get that grouping that I like. Okay. The next thing I wanted to do in this one is I really wanted to say, okay, well, I want to make sure that, again, I'm getting this advance bill, yes. And again, I'm kind of saying, hey, I want this, there, I'll kind of click on this one again. So this one I'm saying, well, how much of this is available? So how much did I advance bill? So once again, I use this case when statement saying, if it's an advance bill, which is yes, right? Then give me the total amount of that invoice. Otherwise, don't put anything. So we use this concept of null. So there's a difference between null, which would be a blank, versus zero. Does that make sense? So if I said else zero, then it'd put a zero. But I actually wanted it to be blank. So when I look at that, that's what I get. Okay. So again, what I said is if it's an advance bill, give me that amount. Otherwise, make it blank. And so I can see that right here. I have my deposit, right? And I can see, this is an advance bill. Here's all the invoices. So I can actually see how much of that was that advance bill. Does that make sense? Okay. But under the revenue one, right? Right. Here's the revenue one. You notice that field is blank, right? And so that was that. It said, if it's an advance bill, give me a value. If it's not an advance bill, make it blank. Okay. So again, these are some of the tricks that we can use to kind of separate things out. Okay. Now, a very common one that we use also, and again, I'm going to jump to a report because that's a more common kind of reporting things out, is I have this one called timesheet backup. And in this one, I saw, I showed you the concatenation. Don't worry about this huge thing. And oftentimes it can just be a couple of things in between the dash, right? And I'll get that separation. One of the very common things I see is that we want the like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday type of thing. Okay. So we're able to do that type of separation out by, again, using this case when. So we're using this new field, and it's called date name. Okay. So again, this is a little SQL coding. I get that. But what we're saying is case when the day is Monday, then tell me how many hours were worked. Otherwise, put a zero there. Now, in this case, because this is numbers and I need them to add up under my total hours, does that make sense? So I can get a subtotal. Instead of using null, I'm going to use zero. Okay, because I do want it to show zero in that particular case so that the entire column can roll up. Okay, so in this case, I said case when, and this one is actually saying date name. So I'm saying I'm looking for the date name, and I'm telling this is day of the week, right? DD, MM, M is month, Y is year, date, weekday is the DW. And I put in the date field. So then it's saying, hey, show me what the name of that day of the week is. And if it equals Monday, give me the hours. Otherwise, make it a zero. Okay, pretty straightforward. All right. And so from there, I'm going to say, again, I did this for each day of the week. Okay. Now, if I look at this, you're saying, well, hold on, isn't that going to give me every single Monday? Right. So if I left it this way, it would give me every person that worked on Monday, it would roll those all up into that field. Okay. So I didn't want that. And that's where this calculated grouping or this grouping came about. I used the week to basically say, make sure these separate out. So I can actually, as you can see, timesheet backup by week, right? So I can see the actual days of the week coming through. Okay. So again, each one. So now that I apply this and run it, that's why I'm seeing this week 26, week 47. Again, so then I can separate each of the Monday through Sundays. And again, sorry about this. We use Microsoft, and unfortunately, Microsoft considers Monday through Sunday the week. Okay. Not Sunday through Saturday. So again, if I'm doing it this way, this is the way I get it separate out. Week 26 on Microsoft is 620 through 626. This is way back in 2010. Sorry about that. But anyway, so again, that's considered week 26 on a Microsoft server. Okay, or a Windows server. And so then I get the separation. There's Monday, there's Tuesday, there's Wednesday, and again, then my grand total. Okay, how do I get my grand total? Couple of things I can do on that one. I can either do this, basically just give me total hours, and my grouping allowed me to get that hours separated out. I don't have to do anything else. Okay. Another thing I could technically do is come in and do a calculated column. Okay. And I can say calculate after main query. So this one only becomes available, sorry, once I use this group rows together. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, how I can use this one. But again, I can actually do, once I have that turned on and I say calculate after main query, it's going to give me a list of columns. And this is where I can say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I can say total hours. Okay. Subtotal this and save. Now, this is basically saying, as you can see, I'm basically saying, wait until all of these are calculated and then add them all together. And so that should give me the same number. There you go, 3, 4, right? So there's a couple of ways, like I said, it just depends on how you set up the report as to how we can use these types of things. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? Any more delving into that? So export, I'll talk about that in a sec. Can you show how to automate a report? I'll get to that. Is it because there's, yeah, thanks, Julie. I'm sure there's something with the concatenation in the equation that kind of caused it a problem. Again, that would get worked out. I just more wanted to show you that we can bring two things together. And I showed you this one is a little more complicated, but for the most part, it was that. Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to troubleshoot. I'm terrible at doing things on the fly. I love to get a formula that groups multiple dates as an example. Okay. Okay. And again, is there a language we look into? So we say this is kind of a simple or SQL. So for the most part, these are SQL queries that I'm doing. As you can see, case when, but SQL has some variations in it, and we call it safe SQL. And that's just basically, for example, in most SQL, for example, it uses, instead of hashes, it uses apostrophes, right? But we use hash marks, okay? And this is one of the reasons we keep telling you, if it's an ID, don't use a special character. The reason is we're going to be using this and making SQL queries, and those special characters cause issues because an ampersand has meaning in SQL. Okay, so that's what we use. So again, if you may have to manipulate the SQL query a bit, but we use most of those: case when, concatenate, date part, convert, those types of things. Those are all from SQL. Okay. 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 And again, if you guys, I know this is moving lightning fast maybe for you. If you just send an email to support@workamajig.com and just say, Dave said to get, send this to him, they'll put it into my mailbox and I'll reply. Okay. 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 How would you calculate OpenIOs for you? Okay. All right. So that was just my timesheet backup. Some of the other questions have to do more with, other fields and how do I kind of manipulate those. And I will kind of show you different ones for that. Okay. In fact, that's where I was kind of heading for now. Is there any question on that simple case when, right? It's case when A equals B. Okay. And again, this is very simple. Okay. Now, another part of the reporting is I kind of jumped into it, is this group rows together. When I group the rows together, I'm going to get this grouping function, and it'll have variations of this. So I'll just quickly show you here. I can group, I can sum, I can average, I can count, I can make it the max, I can make it the minimum. Okay. That's the way we're going group rows together. Okay. And I'll tell you what is selected has a definite consequences. Okay. And part of that is also, what is the data that you're looking into? So let's kind of talk about that. What is the data that I'm reporting on so that when I pull it in, it actually pulls in the numbers that I want? Okay. So for example, this timesheet backup by week. Okay. What is this based on? This is looking at time detailed data. Well, that means it's looking at every single time entry on a timesheet. Doesn't matter if it's approved or not. That's a different question. It's just simply, I put time on a timesheet. Okay. But then we go, well, what are all the different fields that are available for that? Okay. And we have to really think about that a little bit. So as you can see, every single time entry is not just the time entry. This is all the other things that are connected to just that single time entry. Does that make sense? Now, some of these are kind of top level stuff. So they're going to repeat themselves, right? Every time I have a time entry, client product would be available, and it's going to repeat that same field on every single time entry. Okay. So that's where the grouping comes in. I say, well, if the service is this, roll it up and give me just the service one time. Okay. But then I might have a different one that said, if I put in date, for example, well, the dates are different. So it can't roll up anymore. So I still have the service, but then now the service is replicated because I have different dates. If I want it to roll up into one line, I would simply say, okay, just give me the sum. And I can show this to you by saying, well, let me do the date worked. Okay, does that make sense? I'm going to say date worked. Okay, and so now this is going to break it out by date, and you'll notice that suddenly my report is going from this, okay, and now I'll go ahead and run it. It still might do that, but date work, did I not say that? Okay. You see that I now have two different dates. So what did that do? I now have the same project, the same service, and now Monday is broken out from Tuesday because I worked on Tuesday, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So there we go. So this is the thing. When I start, I have to think about when I'm rolling things up, what could maybe cause it to break out, right? And so the date is one of those. So instead of having the date like this, I'm going to go ahead and use that grouping. So all the dates can be there. So that week time is there. And so then I can just say Monday through Sunday, and I can get just those. And so if I remove that, then it can roll back up into a single line per project. Okay. All right. Hope that helps. All right. So now let's look towards some other things that may come into play. So I have this one report. Let's see. I think it's, let's see. I thought I had that up. Oh, I know. Okay. Sorry here. So under my project management and assignments, I have this one called do but not done by staff. Okay. Okay. So what is this one doing? Right? This is giving me a list of items, right? And it's kind of showing me each individual thing. Now, this one I can't really roll up, but I do have one that's called task assignment. And again, you know, if I roll things up in that one, so for example, here's allocated hours. Sorry, get to my recents here. Yeah, here we go. Okay. This is actually a custom report based upon that same thing, my assignments, right? And so I come in and it has all this information, right? But now let's do this. So I'm not going to group the rows. And if I add in allocated hours, right? Then maybe actual hours, right? Okay. Oh, this one's going to do it. Sorry. That's where it starts to get, again, my allocation may be by assignment. So this one will actually work where the allocated hours would be the same. The actual task hours, again, that's a roll up in this particular one because it's looking at the task level information. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. But then when I get to more but that time entry that I was just on, right? That time detail data, right? So let's look at this timesheet backup one again. And now that I have this, right? Well, what happens if I put in allocated hours? Which it is, right? And now the question comes in, well, I have this grouping, right? What happens if I sum it, right? If I sum it, that means every time entry is going to go there. So let me go ahead and show you that one. So now that I sum it, I'm going to go ahead and grab John. I'm going to go week one here. Okay. Oh, let me find one that has allocations. Here we go. Okay. So this one has this allocation and it says 12 hours, right? And why does it say 12 hours? Because I allocated the hours and I said sum. But if I think about it, allocation is at that task level, right? So if I click into this, this is saying, okay, I come into here and I go to the schedule. Okay. And you'll see that probably I'm in here and it's probably 222. You can see all the twos in there, right? This is all John Arbuckle's assignments, right? Okay. So I'm being allocated actually just 2 hours on the assignment, but then why is it giving me 12? Okay. And the reason is every time I put a time entry, that 2 hours is there. So if it's if you sum it, it's like 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, right? So it finally ends up at 12. Okay. So this is where you say, okay, I want it to be more exact. So instead of summing it, this is where I might say, I'm going to average it, or I may max it, or I may group it. Now, the grouping may have different assignments and things like that to come into play. But again, anytime there's a two assignment, just group all the twos together. Does that make sense? So that's what grouping would do. Okay. Let's get back to that same one. So now you can see it actually says 6, and that's believable. I think I have actually 6 assigned to that. Okay. But does that make sense? I have 2 time entries and then it's going to say 6. But on each one of those, because you can see I'm in different ones, I'm being, all of them say 6. And again, that's where that information kind of gets a little hazy on it. Okay. So again, just be aware of when you're grouping or summing, or do I show max, that it depends on that field. What is the data that it's actually looking at? So again, I see the actual hours. That's going, I put an hour on, it's going to say an hour. I put 3 1-hour timesheet entries. I'll ask, roll all of those up, right? But allocation is set. So every time entry has that same amount of allocated hours associated with it. So if I summed it, it's going to be 6 plus 6 plus 6. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's why I'd say group it. So it just says 6 once. Okay. Then what happens when I start to do a calculation? And so this is the most common one, and why this calculated column actually works pretty well is now when I do the calculated column, I can now say, like I said, I can say, well, wait until the main thing is done. Okay. So in this case, I can say, well, do allocated hours minus my actual. So I can say remaining. Okay. And I say minus. Okay. So what would this do? So this is waiting until I get a grand total and then saying, go ahead and make the calculation. Otherwise, what would happen? I would have allocated hours, which would be, let's say, 10, or let's say, let's say 10, right? And I have 3 time entries. So if I do that calculation, I had 1 time entry for an hour, right? 10 minus 1, right? 10 minus 1. That would be results as 9, right? The problem is if I do that 3 times, 10 minus 1, 10 minus 1, 10 minus 1, amount remaining 27. Not quite what you want, right? So we're waiting until the end. And then we say, okay, wait until the end. That means I'm going to have my 3 and I'm going to have allocation, which is group. That'll be 10 minus 3 gives me 7, which would be the correct answer. So again, that's where this one comes in. So now when I add that in that calculation, do the search again, and I get the remaining, you can see that I get that 6 minus 1 or 6 minus 4, right? That's 4, right? So I get that 2 remaining. Okay. Does that make sense? So again, just be aware of what is that data set looking for. Okay. What is the data that's being presented in its raw form? And then how can we manipulate it down so it just shows us, certain items? And then how can I start to do some of the calculations? Okay. Make sense? Okay. Let me stop just a second. Do you have a list of various acronyms? Okay. There might not really be. Okay. Okay. So now when we start looking at percentages, okay, I get that question quite a bit. And usually what we have to look at, again, when I look at percentages, and this is going to be a weird one because, again, I'm going to go ahead and use this one. I'm going to say I'll use a calculated column, right? And I'll go ahead and say, I'm going to calculate it. And I'm going to do, how much of the allocated did I use? So to me, that would be actual via divided by allocated, right? Gives me a percentage. So I change the plus into that. And I'm going to say percent. Okay. And I go ahead and run that. And I bet you I get an error. Pretty sure. There we go. Oh my gosh, I got an error. Why is that? Okay. And that is because if I kind of come through, and I did this before, right? Right. My allocated hours may actually be 0, right? And I can't divide by 0. Okay. So since I can't divide by 0, anytime that I have this kind of a divisor, right, I need to put in a little bit of code so it can do this. So what do I do? Okay. I'm going to say case when. Okay. And this is going to be weird because, again, if I didn't allocate, it's actually technically blank. So when something is blank, we can't do a report on it because it's blank. There's nothing there. So I'm going to trick the system and say, hey, if it's blank or not, right? If that makes sense, I'm going to say is null, right? So is null, one word, okay? Put in an open parenthesis. I'm going to then use my field allocated hours. So allocated hours, okay? And square parenthesis. And I'm going to say, hey, if allocated hours is, I'm going to replace basically saying if allocated hours is null, make it a 0. Make sense? That's just one of the code. And then I'm going to say equals 0, then 0. Else, do my calculation. And this time I want a true percentage. So I'm going to go ahead and surround this by parentheses. And there's a couple of ways to do this. And I'm going to multiply that by 100. Okay. And then I'm going to type end. So the idea here is saying, hey, I'm going to have allocated hours, but if there's no allocated hours, make it a 0. And then if allocated hours equals 0, just make the field 0. Okay. Otherwise, do my calculation, actual hours divided by allocated hours. And then because I wanted a true, a true percentage, right? Instead of a dot, 0.97, I want to say 97. I'm just multiplying that by 100. There's some that would do actual hours times 100 divided by allocated hours. Works the same way, right? So again, you're just kind of putting that in. For me, it's clearer to say open and close parenthesis and then multiply the results by 100. Okay. So now when I run this, okay, no error, right? And then when I kind of scroll over, you can see that I get the 16.67 based upon that. Okay. So again, anytime that I have what is potentially a null or a 0 in the divisor, the way you get around that is you make the divisor, you put this code in for the divisor field. Okay, whatever that is. Again, that could be actual hours worked. It could be, allocated hours. It could be budget hours. It could be, whatever that is, right? So it's a number. And if the number happens to be blank, make it a 0, right? That makes sense? And then do this calculation on it. Okay. All right. Now, again, once you've kind of done all these, make sure that you do the apply and make sure you memorize, because otherwise, if you didn't memorize it, guess what happens when you refresh? It's gone. Okay. So not a good thing. Okay. So just make sure that you're kind of, memorizing that and then go back in once you've done it and then start to work on it again, just so you don't lose your work. Okay. So again, apply changes, memorize, then modify it again and start working on some more things. Okay. Now, one of the cool things we have, and we would welcome, if you guys are pretty good at making reports, I know you're here to learn how to make reports. We do have a functionality for you to share things. Okay. Now, based upon timesheet backup by week, that's the name of it sitting here, right? Now, I'd also say if you're going to share these, there's no custom fields in here because, again, your custom fields are not my custom fields. So I would have to have that custom field in here for me to get it, right? So again, tend to provide reports that don't have that. But how do I share this with others? I actually can come into here. Once I modify it, I can come in and say export the view. Okay. Once I export the view, you can see it names it timesheet backup by week. So whatever the name of the report is, right, it'll create a CSV file. Okay. Once I get that, I go to, somebody sends that to me, and that's what I'll be doing. I'll be sending it to you. You go to Admin Manager, Import Data, and under view, I know that's a report, but it's still a view, right? So views and reports can act the same way. And you say, select the file, and you get that file. Sorry, here's my downloads. Okay, so here's the file there. You don't have to do anything. Just select the file, display the file, touch nothing. Okay. However, if you wanted to change the name, you could click here and change the name of the report. But don't touch anything else. Why? Because this is already preset to come in exactly like the report that I just did. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to call this backup by David, right? Just so I can see that it came in. So it's something different. The name is going to be backup, timesheet backup by David. And I just import it and it should import absolutely no problem. So again, the only thing you should be able to change is that right there. And so once that's done, I come back into the report center and I can say David, because I'll do a search and there it is right there. Now, when it comes in, whoever imported it, it is mine. Okay. So you would have to then uncheck private and make it visible to others. But that's the way I can bring in these kind of shared reports between people. And if you guys want to send me, those reports and say, hey, this is a great report that I run, and it helps me, I'd be happy to take those and I'll put them into our help guide with a download link for it. Okay. Happy to do that for you guys to share. Okay. That's another way, through our community, you could share those reports as well. Okay. All right. Let me get to some Q&A here. Timesheet backup, I make sure it would be okay. Okay. Like I said, send me a note and I will send you the reports that I have and the ones that I've been reporting on. I'm happy to send those to you. Okay. How would you? Okay, the aging report. That's a great question. Okay, so this is kind of not so much the open IOs, but I don't have that example for open IOs, but I do have one for AR aging. So this is a pretty common one that we have, AR aging. So we have our standard AR aging, right? That is pretty much under the finance side, right? I have to go to billing, today billing, or some other, accounting, and I get this. Well, I don't want to give my people access to that. So what can I do? I can create more of a specific one, the AR aging, okay? And this would be, again, right now I didn't group it, but I can group this by account manager. Okay, so let me just quickly do that. Insert a row, account manager, there it is. Drag that to the top, apply the changes, memorize, there we go. Okay. So you can see now it's kind of separated out by each account manager. And again, if I collapse that, then here's my account managers. I look at John, here's the AR aging. What did I do on this one? So as you can see, just like this, I have both the deposit and revenue invoices, for example. What's the invoice amount? What's the amount open? And I actually did the aging of it as well. Okay. How did I get that done? Well, again, at super duper case when. Okay. So what I did is, again, the case when 0 to 30. This is another kind of case when statement. And in this one, it's just saying case when the posting date is between, and I'm saying this date add, and I'm saying the date add is when that record was added into the system, which is, again, it's looking usually at the posting date, right? Because that's what it's looking at, when the posting date was created. And then that's minus 30. So 30 days prior to the get date, which is get date equals today, right? So 30 days prior to today. And it's between the get date today, so 30 days prior and today, if that makes sense. Then give me the amount open. Otherwise, make it a 0. Okay. And I did this for 30 and then I did 60, right? And this one, I actually had to separate it out. I had to say 60 and then 30 because this one's already taking care of 30, right? 0 to 30. So the next one I have to do 60 to 30, right? And then this one is doing the 60, 90. And then anything greater than 90, I said, anytime the posting date is greater than 90 days, 90 days back, then give me the open amount. So that's how I kind of, manipulate that. So doing the IOs that are kind of the same thing, right? We could manipulate that same thing. What is the order date? So I would just say case when order date is, greater than 40, right? And then my date field, right? Or something like that. And that would give me those particular ones, right? So again, that's where I can manipulate. Depends on what I'm looking at. This one happens to be I'm looking at client invoices because that's the data set I'm using. If I used orders, then again, the fields I would use is probably order date instead of posting date. But then the rest of the information is kind of the same, right? I might have to change this because that's a amount open, that's for invoices, but I might not have that filled for orders. That makes sense. So I might have order amount or order total, invoice total, right? Whatever that value is that you want to get, if it falls within this case statement. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. The having is there a way to add the calculator, have a percent sign? Unfortunately, no. Okay. And why I say that is because oftentimes the percentage, I mean, I guess I can concatenate it in, but then I'd have to make sure that my number is converted over into a variable character, which means it's seen as a text instead of a number. And sometimes that causes a little issue. So I tend to say name it. And then also a percentage sign has special meaning. So sometimes that's a little hard to get that percentage sign in. Okay. So I would just say the column is a percent. And so I would name it percent, right? Percent complete as opposed to having it in the field itself. Okay. All right. So I talked about that. So the next one we talk about is, again, I showed you kind of how to manipulate, do the case wins, how to concatenate things. There's other things we can do to manipulate the data. But for the most part, again, it's how do I get that data out and give the information we want to see and maybe some of the base calculations. Now, I'll be honest with you. There's some things that we can't do, right? Again, we can't combine things that we would leave that to the API, right? Or you're exporting it to Excel. Okay. That's just the way it is. We siloed things off so the reporting functionality can, quickly bring up the reports, and quickly is, I kind of in air quotes, quickly. So again, we don't have a garbage can report, right? Give me everything in the system, because we know every accountant would say, great, run it, run it, run it, run it, run it, and then basically drag the system down. So again, that's why we kind of silo things out, and we also limit some of the returned results, depending on what it is. But again, the API is a way for you to combine the different silos together. Otherwise, again, or export those reports into Excel. Okay. Now, the last thing I can talk about is actually, and this is fairly common for like the AR aging, right, that I created, right, is I want my people. So I want Bryn, I want BZ, and I want David to get that report each Monday. Okay. So how would I run that? So in this case, I'm going to add a filter in for account manager. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and apply. I do have the account manager. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to run this for just John Arbuckle. Okay. There we go. So this is all of John Arbuckle's stuff. So the other thing, as you see, I say amount open not equal to zero. So I'm going to get credit memos and positive ones. If there's an amount open, negative or positive, it will be on the report, which makes sense, right? That would be where the AR aging comes in, right? Okay. So that's my main filters. It's been posted, which means it's committed. If it hasn't been committed, it's not in the report. Good with that? Okay. So now how do I make sure that John gets this every single Monday? We do have the feature. Once I hit search, I'm going to get them, under more, I'll be able to refresh. Oh, let me memorize it. So it hardwires it. Okay. Okay. Right. I hadn't saved it. That's why it was a little confused. So I saved that. So once it's here, I can create a new schedule. Okay. So again, I ran this for John. So I'm going to say new schedule. and I get to the schedule details. And this is really the part I'm going to manipulate. I'm going to say, what is the schedule name? Please name this specifically for what you did or put in a description. This will definitely help you, right? Especially when I look at a list of scheduled reports. If they're all named AR aging, it ain't going to help, right? Because I won't know which one's which. So, the scheduled report is based upon the filters you set at that time. After that, it's going to run it with those filters, and that's the way it'll work. If you change the filters, that's will be a different schedule that can be created. So this is how I can create an AR aging just for John and send it to John. Then I'll do another one for the other people. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to say AR aging for J.R. Buckle, right? Or for John, or however you want to say it, right? But I name it, I can, right? I'm going to say, well, how many days do I want to keep this report? So he can come back to that link for 21 days, then it goes away. Okay, that's usually enough because I'll have another report. Okay. If there's no data in the report, do I send that note to them saying, hey, you don't have anything in aging? Is that you want it or not, right? So that would be that there's no data. Do I send that email? Well, oftentimes people say, no, I don't need that. It's only if there's data. Okay. I can send it as a PDF, an Excel, or a CSV. And most of the time I would probably send this as a PDF, right? Okay. How often does it occur? Well, actually, I want it to go out on Monday. So I'm going to check, weekly. And that allows me to get this, right? So if I say weekly, I can say send it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Thursday, that type of thing, right? So I can say, if I say monthly, then it's once a month and it's on what day do you want to send it, right? There's different choices for that. Daily, I think would be overkill for this type of report. But again, usually I see it weekly every Monday, or I send it monthly on the first of the month or the second of the month or something like that. Okay. When do I want it to end, right? I tend to say set these up for a year and then reset it. But again, if you want to say no end date, that's up to you. End after is more about how many occurrences do I want it to go. Or the other is the end by, where I actually pick a date. Like I said, I tend to say, okay, go ahead and make this 12/31, 24. So then in January, I'll reset all of these, and maybe because again, there's promotions and things like that, change in scopes, right? Up to you. Okay. So once that is saved, okay, there it is. I can always come into the schedule and edit this, and it'll accept those changes here. And I'll show you how to get back to it. Okay. The more important one is this right here, email to. Okay. So again, this is for John, right? So I'm going to make sure that John gets it. And there we go. If I need it to go to anybody else, I can click their names. There's by staff. I could send this out by contacts, but I don't think your contacts, this is for add new company. This one's for best of class. This is for something else, right? Bill tax, Bobco. Do you really want Bobco to know about best of classes invoices? Probably not. Does that make sense? So again, you're not going to send this report to them. But again, if you want somebody within your team, they can see that. Okay. That makes sense? Right? Once that's done, it's done. We're good to go. Okay. So there it is. So when I search for that, again, now I'll do another one, right? I would change this from John to somebody else, right? I want, let's see, who was my other one? Bryn. Okay. Run this, do the same thing, new schedule. After I do the search, new schedule. And now that new schedule would be based upon Bryn. Okay. Okay. Now, for viewing the scheduled reports, I can come into this report and say, view the scheduled reports, and I'm going to see that list. Okay. So now you know why I name it properly, right? So now I know that this is John's one. So I can manipulate John's versus Bryn will say AR aging for Bryn. Does that make sense? So that's why I'm doing that. Okay. All right. Now, again, some of those, I can't schedule everything, but that's a great way to get that done. Is again, and then we have under we can actually see a whole list of these. I believe that's system setup and global lists and sorry, let's see, scheduled reports. So this is more for the admin side. You'll see that this is kind of the list for admins. And so these are going to be hard. Which one do I delete? Do I delete this all contacts one, right? So it makes it hard. So this is another reason I said, make sure you name that schedule properly so I can quickly find it and remove it if need be. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. A good question for the scheduled reports. When I set the filter and I say, I cannot use the concept under the like project manager and say the project manager is me. I can run the report that way, but I can't schedule a report because the schedule is who is me, right? So I set it up for John, but then I say who is me? Well, me is somebody else, right? And so the system doesn't know that. So you're not allowed to use that for your scheduled reports. You just need to use again a specific name so the system can read that in the future. Okay. Now again, when do I get scheduled reports? Okay, sorry. Seems to be a question here. Sorry, everyone. Oh, I got it. Okay. So when I'm looking at these, okay, and I try to schedule it until I run it, I really can't run I can't create a new schedule. Okay. So it's really going off of the filters that you have in place for it to run. Okay. So once I run it, then it's going to allow me for that. So that's one of the reasons when I did this and came back out, sorry, I have to make a change in here. Okay. That's going to break it. But okay, so I get this memorized. You notice I can't schedule it, and that's because it doesn't know what the filters are. So again, I always have to set filters. And I said for the account manager is me, which is a possibility. It will not run that way. Okay. Okay. So I think we got it to. So again, we're up to our hour. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer if you guys have any specific questions. But like I said, as a kind of a wrap up, yeah, an email to support@Workamajig. Say I have some questions for custom reports, and I'd be happy to answer those. As far as graphs, I did not cover graphs in this particular call. I know that we're going to have another webinar that will look into this a little bit more because they're talking more about the graphing capabilities. So sorry I didn't touch on that. That one has a lot of caveats and kind of it's own entity, so to speak, of how to manipulate that. So sorry I didn't cover that bit. Okay. 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 Good question is there any where are custom reports collected and centralized? Okay. So if you go to, Workamajig Everyone Report Center, custom reports tend to be here, wherever it's usually under other report. Okay. But there is a way, as you can see, I can create custom folders. And that's in system setup. I can create report folders. And so those are it. And then how do I put them into those folders is under the modify and settings. There's this display in group, and this will give me a list of all of those different folders, right? Okay. And so there's the other, but again, if I named one, said, oh, these are my sales leads reports, right? So that's my sales lead. So any report I put into there, most of the people who are in that sales lead would be able to see it. Okay. And again, access is always controlled by the security rights, right? So again, if I don't make this private, it's going to be, is my security group allowed to see this report? Okay. That's really what it's doing. Can I see this report? Whether I can run it or edit it, that's a security right involved in that. I can show you where that is. So under admin, system setup, security settings, And we have one, which is views, I think. Here we go. So design custom reports, run custom reports. So if I have design, that means I have the modify. If I don't have that, then I don't. Does that make sense? But I can still run them, and I need you to set that so that I can actually see that report and run it. Does that make sense? Okay. Then the views are actually a different one. Maybe we set that up. Here we go. It's this one right here. So most of the views I can see if they're on mine, that's kind of there, but it's edit custom listings. That's actually the views, right? So if I can edit the view, that means when I come into this, these are views, and I come to, sorry, views, and I click on companies, again, do I get the modify button or not? That's really what we control that one by. Okay. Although once I do modify this and I go to the settings, I can decide if your security group can see it or not. But for the most part, the views, they're able to see it. We're controlling that access in a different way. Okay. Okay. Now, as far as again, other people developing and sharing, we do have a community, and I know some people share on that. But like I said, if you want to send me ones, I can start kind of a project on my side or a location to kind of house these. So if you guys come up with one, I would import that into my system and test it out, and then make a decision on whether to upload that into our central one. And I just make that part of the Workamajig support site. Okay. As far as the API and things like that, again, that's usually a call, right? So if you have questions on the API, just set up some time with your support person, with your account manager, and we'd be happy to talk about that. But otherwise, if you do go to support.workamajig.com, which is the help guide, and type in API, that'll give you a little look into it. But otherwise, if you're serious about the API, you go to admin, system setup, connections, and API. And this is the documentation for the REST API that we have in force. Okay. All right. Anything else? Again, let me let me make sure if I kind of got through thing, doing the export report outputs. Okay. Is there a way to change that? You show how to automate. Okay, we did that. Did it because there's okay? Is there extra space? Okay, and for the one I would love to get a formula that groups multiple dates. Again, just send in that request so I can reply back to you directly. It's saying I want to get a formula that groups multiple dates as an example, right? And so again, I just have to put the coding in and test it a little bit to make sure. And also, what is it that you're trying to get those multiple dates for, right? Okay. And again, what is the language we use? It's a SQL database, so we're using SQL, but we have safe SQL, so it's not true SQL. We make some little changes and we don't allow certain things to happen, right? We can't form tables in order to house things and then do calculations against those other, that extra data. So it kind of it's more of a query type reporting functionality. Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just kind of traveling through the questions. Okay, that looks like all the questions. If you guys have any more, happy to stay a little bit longer. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Again, any questions you have, support at workamajig.com. I'm happy to help you out individually. And again, please share, right? If you guys have reports that you run after you kind of set them up and you think it'd be helpful for, Workamajig users, please send us those. We're happy to get those, to other people. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again very much and have a great rest of the day and talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.